They keep extra smart, they keep me on the shows.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm trying to do my best.
I don't like one.
Oh, good.
All right.
Are we ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Introduction. Okay. I hope the people, welcome to the people on Zoom and welcome to everyone who is here in attendance. Thank you so much for coming out of here. It's a really nice day outside. So thank you for taking it.
A bit windy.
A bit windy. Okay, so come in and, get out of the wind.
Get out of
And we may have some people, kind of trickle in. So we had a pretty, full attendance list for this. So hi, welcome. Okay, so first and foremost, I would like to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring this program today. Thank you so much. The Friends of the Library are a volunteer organization. They manage that wonderful book cart that we have at the front of the library that so many of you come in and, purchase those donated items or donate items for the book cart. And our friend is they're having a book sale at the Trenton Wide City Garage Sale on the weekend of May 18th. So I hope you come out for that. And if you're looking at ways to get more involved with the library, we'd love to get you in touch with the Friends of the Library. So thank you so much for sponsoring this program. I also wanted to point out, there's some books for checkout over on the table there, and there's also a survey. So we'd love to get your feedback on this program, other programs that you'd like to see at the library. So please fill that out and you can give it to me or up at the circulation desk. And before I forget, I will just say, if anyone is interested in getting a copy of the PowerPoint presentation from Dr. Holley's presentation, let me know and I will get you a copy of the presentation. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Holley.
Just call me Bob.
Hi, Bob. I hope I can do that. He was my teacher.
And students have great problems with that.
He'll say that in his email. He'll say, see you Saturday, Bob. And I'll say, Dr. Holley. He is a true champion of learning in libraries. Dr. Holley earned his PhD in philosophy and French literature from Yale University and a master's degree in library science from Columbia University. Throughout his career, which includes roles at Wayne State University and the University of Utah, Dr. Holley has been a force for positive change in library management and collection development. Dr. Holley is the largest donor in the School of Information Sciences history, ensuring that opportunities for education reach everyone, especially those who might not have had them otherwise. Dr. Holley's generosity extends to the Dr. Robert Holley Endowed Scholarship, which supports students from urban areas and underrepresented backgrounds. Even in retirement, Dr. Holley remains an active participant in the field, sharing his expertise at national conferences and contributing to professional journals. His enduring legacy of generosity and dedication to education will continue to inspire future generations of scholars and librarians. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Holley.
I gave a speech once where I said, how many of you know who the people are who named all those buildings on the Wayne campus? So shame does not continue all that far. All right, let's get started. This is the title. Okay, the first thing I want to say is how I'm going to do it today. And I really, really mean it. My goal is not to have you go to sleep. So I will do my best to make this interesting. I love to tell stories. What I'm planning for, again, as a faculty member, that we will take no longer than an hour to give the prepared remarks, to have time for questions. And if any of you want to stay afterwards, Erin has said it's okay, and I will answer questions. I will talk about it here. Don't worry about offending me. If you have a difficult question, I welcome difficult questions. That's the best way that you can shine. So this is a little bit, I really, really believe in First Amendment rights, intellectual freedom, and the broader inclusion of information in public libraries, in all libraries. And also the second point is very, very important. I defend the right to people to speak that I totally disagree with. So I just want those people to give me the same rights that I give them. So I don't care what your opinions are, you want to say something, that's your right. I am not a lawyer, but I follow this. I believe that what I'm going to tell you is accurate legally. There's a few cases right now where things are up in the air. And I'm also willing to say where I don't know. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. If you're really serious, give me your email address and I'll try to answer later. I have a fairly good sense of what happens in public libraries, and I have some very good reasons for that. It's called pillow talk with my two wives, who were both librarians. The first one worked at the New Haven City Public Library. The second one, who is seated here, and we are been happily married now for almost 41 years. She worked at the Salt Lake City Public Library when I started, and here in Michigan, she was a high school librarian at Berkeley High School. Also, and this is changing, actually very few books are banned. Even that's changing, more are being banned, and challenged is probably the better word. And we'll talk more about that later. And as I said, I can't say anything about Trenton because I don't know anything about Trenton. Aaron would have to answer any of those questions. Okay, I'm not going to read you the text of the First Amendment. It says a lot of interesting things. In addition to freedom of speech, which is the part for intellectual freedom. There's a link there, so if you have the PowerPoint, it's a very, very long, but very, very good discussion at the Library of Congress about the First Amendment. The first thing to tell you all is that freedom of speech is probably protected more in the United States than any place in the world. As I go through this list, I think you may be surprised at what you can do. First of all, hate speech is legal in the United States. As long as you are not inciting anyone to action to harm, you could go down the street yelling at people with racial slurs and it would be legal. Now, I don't say you won't get beat up, but it is legal. They cannot take you to court for doing it. So that is one of the areas where we have the most free speech. Holocaust denial is legal. There's some place right over, very close to you, just across the river, where you can go to jail for Holocaust denial. People have gone to jail in various countries, but legal in the United States. The one amazing thing is lying is legal in most cases. Defamation isn't, so that there was a suit where the voting machine company won a lot of money, but the Supreme Court decided that a gentleman who lied about getting all these Army medals and put it on his resume, that was not illegal. It was up to the employer to double check on the information in the resume. I'm not saying it won't get you in trouble, it won't get you fired, but it won't send you to jail. Actually, and then the next one, and this is in public libraries, the most contentious area as it is in school libraries, is sexual content between consenting adults is legal in the United States currently, effectively. Some of the laws still exist, but they're no longer enforced, except maybe right now in Arizona, where they're saying that the Comstock rule, which has lots of things that we don't accept anymore, may be legal. And the rules are different for people under 18, but those people, children up to 18, also have some legal rights. The other thing I'm going to say is that I'm going to focus on public libraries. The rules are quite different for school libraries and media centers, but I don't have enough time to do that. There will be some brief mentions as I go along, but the situation in a school, in a public school, is very different. All right, one thing though is that only protects speech from government censorship. And so that if you are a government body, that gives you free speech rights. The other thing is that it doesn't apply to private bodies. Now, I'm not so sure, the first line there, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, that's one of the things that's on the agenda for some politicians to be able to censor these groups. The real reason behind it, and I'll talk about it now, is that you invite these groups into your home, and therefore they are not government. To go ahead a little bit, this is the difference between broadcast television and cable television. Broadcast television is available to everybody, so the government can regulate it. Cable television, you have to invite into your house, and so cable television can do what it wants without censorship. I lived in Utah, where the state of Utah spent millions of dollars trying to censor our movies on cable television. They knew they would lose the suit, but it was still a political gesture important to the politicians. But cable television is different. Okay, all right, I just said that, I wasn't looking ahead. And since about the 1830s, anything that is in the Constitution applies to the states. And they could not censor more. They cannot censor more. You can have greater protections against censorship in various states. But the First Amendment in the Constitution is, how should I say, the upper limit as far as anything that happens in the states.
I have a question. On the second bullet, you've got non-public libraries and charter schools. In this state, charter schools receive state funding. So aren't they considered government?
It depends on the case.
Okay.
There have been various cases that say no, but that they do not have to do it. One of the big issues now, in fact, is how regulated charter schools are. But most of them, they are not a government body completely. And it often depends upon the arrangements with the government, whether or not the First Amendment applies. For example, in the areas where foster care is publicly supported, that is included, and so there have been suits about the rules there. But charter schools and non-public libraries have up to this point been declared that they don't have to do the same as public schools.
Even though they're overseers, or 99% of
Right.
them are public
Okay.
college.
I don't understand it anymore.
Okay.
than you do. I don't understand, but Yale University, Columbia, Wayne State is, they're under the rule. Columbia, Yale, and all of the other colleges are not.
Okay.
And one of the big thing is that while creationism could not be taught in a public school, according to the court decision, it could be taught in a charter school.
Wow.
And there may be rules in the state that would change that. Okay, the next level up is censorship. So in other words, the First Amendment says you can't do anything about it, and censorship is the attempt to remove objectionable material. Now, the difference here is that lots of bodies can censor. So that if you're a private body, if you're Facebook, if you're Twitter, if you're a magazine, you can indeed censor what occurs in the publication, and there are no restrictions. So that what Wayne State can't do, Lawrence Tech could, or the University of Detroit Mercy could, so that non-governmental bodies can censor material. Okay, and then the last one I already just talked about, and so that they're not covered by the First Amendment. Now, I will state that lots of these groups have policies that they don't censor material, and I applaud them for doing that, but they don't have to. In other words, they can be more restrictive. And then the final one, intellectual freedom, is the broadest of it. Because intellectual freedom is not just that you don't provide material, but that there is an obligation to present information and receive information from all points of views. And so this goes beyond not providing it to providing it. And most public libraries then agree with this principle that we are going to provide material that some people object to, and we wouldn't have to have them for reasons I'll talk about in a few minutes, but we'll do it anyway. The other thing is, and this is the question of size. So if you're a very, very small library, you obviously don't have to include as many materials that reflect variant viewpoints than if you're a very, very large library where you're going to have a more diverse community and you're also going to have more budget to include variant material. So, all right.
Well, would they base that like on a percentage?
Usually it isn't. We'll get to that a bit. It's not the percentage, but again, if you have, all right, I don't know which your immigrant communities are here, but let's say the Hmong material, and you had one Hmong family in your service district, and you were a small library, that would create less of a reason for having those materials than if you were a very large library. So.
Like I have a question, how does that affect, like, we have a joint, I don't know what you call it, but where we can get our ebooks and stuff.
Okay,
Does it apply to that?
okay, I'm talking about the selection, like,
In our
the
building.
joint part would be then the selections from every single one. I just asked the book from that book
Right,
the other day. And if you're getting, large consortial collections, most of the time the libraries belonging to the consortium have some say. So you would be more likely to get the more focused materials from the consortium, and if that doesn't work, you can get them from the Library of Michigan. Okay, quite bluntly, the first sentence is the most important thing about it. I'm going to read this one. The public library has the responsibility for meeting the information needs of its user community, including recreational reading and viewing. And so its goal is to present mainstream and divergent perspectives as much as possible. It can focus on majority viewpoints, but it shouldn't overlook minority viewpoints. Giving another experience from Utah that Martha encountered, she was talking to a public library director there that he didn't need to have any gay themed material because there were no gays in his service district. And given the statistics on the number of gays in the community, I believe that it is an impossible statement. So yes, you can focus more on the needs of the community, but you shouldn't neglect the other viewpoints, in part because the majority community may also be interested in those viewpoints. So if in your mostly, for example, in if you're in an area that is mostly belong to one religious denomination, you might have people in your library belonging to that denomination that are interested in others or in other viewpoints and other lifestyles. And again, the whole issue of if you want to explore the world, you want to find out about something you don't know, if you're interested in how the people live in Bhutan, it might be important to have a book on Bhutan. Broad range of opinions on contentious issues. The general principle, though, is that you should have factually accurate material, and you should also not have, most of the time, two types of materials. Materials that inappropriately proselytize to that viewpoint without being factual. And you should also avoid, if at all possible, materials that denigrate other groups, other communities, other viewpoints. That these two things I just said may not apply in all times, because there could be bestsellers that do that, and you would need to have them, but that's one thing. And I like this, what the public library is. It acts as a mirror of its users, but it offers a window to the outside world. So that's what a good public library should be. The other thing is that the public library has changed greatly. What you can find in the public library is very different from what you could find a while ago, and that's what's going to be on the next slide. And so that we have an American culture, and while there are variations, there are significant changes between what Americans thought in 1795 and what they think in 2024. I guess the word maybe libraries came in about 1850, but let me pick 1855. And the viewpoints have the library should purchase and what users expect to find in the library. The worst thing that can happen to a small public library is buying a book that nobody ever wants to read. And so it is legitimate to say that if a certain class of material never circulates, you have more of a reason to reduce it, but probably not to totally eliminate it, because I expect in most areas at least some of the materials were circulating. Okay, here's my thing. Things that are okay now. We now include gender and racial equality in a way we didn't. Think back to the 1950s. When people talk about going back to the 1950s, the 1950s were great for
White men.
With a spouse who didn't work, who had children, what else? And I went to church every Sunday. And so that was the norm back then. The norm today is very different. The recent Pew survey says there's, for example, a very strong decline in religious participation. While many people are still spiritual, the numbers of people that no longer go to church regularly is up to about 40% in the United States. Gender equality, we got LGBTQ issues and divorce. Remember a time when you just didn't get divorced because, yeah, it might be legal, but nobody would pay any attention to you anymore. So divorce has been one. Not okay. Well, we don't have segregation anymore. Misogamy. I think most people are against pollution. Depends what they want to do it. And I included smoke. We still have smokers in the United States, which is definitely more than fewer than we had a long time ago. And then the issue for intellectual freedom is the contested areas. And there are different viewpoints on these, and people hold it strongly on both parts of it. Reproductive rights, gun control, climate change, sexual expression, and harmful or derogatory speech. So there are strong battles waging in those areas, and the public library is often caught in the crosshairs of the divergence of opinion, and it should try to represent both viewpoints with accurate, non-derogatory materials on the subjects. Both sides, and again, I give two examples here, reputable materials on both sides of these issues. So you got the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, one representing the left, one representing the right, but both of them are high quality materials, factual, and have a lot of supporters, sometimes on the other side. And then MSNBC and Fox News are two very different things, but they both reflect the place in American society. This is my example, the impetus to change. And my thought on this matter, I've actually not seen it as print, is that you need to have a group of people that comes to the public library and awakens to the library to the fact that there is a group out there that's not being served. And so I'm going to hear when they need to speak up and fight for changes. And I'm kind of giving the push for civil rights and desegregation in the 1960s. The 4 waves of feminism that go all the way back to the Me Too movement. And then the gay rights movement in the 1960s and the 1970s. Environmental change, starting with Rachel Carson. And this one I was very surprised to learn about. But that actually, before the 1980s, there were many public libraries that were hesitant to buy Christian fiction because they said, well, we shouldn't be representing religious viewpoints. And then, since it is a valid way of expressing things, that changed. Personal privacy and the arrival of the internet in the 1990s. And then one of the big issues now, as some of you probably know, is the whole issue of legal but speech that is hurtful to some groups. Probably the most hurtful one, I am not going to say, which is the N-word. And so that we have problems about Huckleberry Finn, which is basically supportive of Black rights in an underlying message, but uses an obsolete vocabulary. There are other areas where this happens, but how many of you know what the real word, okay, is gypsy a derogatory term?
It used to be.
Yes, it is.
Yes, and they would like to be called Romany. We lived in Utah, and actually, the Mormons consider Mormons a derogatory term. They want to be known as the LDS Church, but they or the Saints. But they use the Mormon term because they realize that's what people are going to recognize. The final group that I think is not included is non-believers. I think that non-believers are still not accepted well enough in American society. And once you start having demonstrations in front of your library for not having enough material for paganism, non-believers, Wicca, devil worship, and those things, maybe the public library will stop. All right, devil worship is complete. It actually happened in Utah where the devil worshippers were having a convention and people complained to the police and said, you can't do anything about it. It's completely legal. Okay. All right, now let's get to the issue of libraries. One of the big issues for libraries is it is impossible even for the largest library to have everything. And so the idea behind it is that you should select what is useful for your library, select what is appropriate for your library and what is valid. And that is selection, it is not censorship. But then it can fall into censorship, sometimes without the library even knowing about it. So this is a fine line. So a library may not be censoring if they don't get something for various reasons. And I read the next two, but the selection policy and the selection choices should not reflect just the views of the librarians or just the views of the political and social figures, the elites of your community, but what the people need. So to pick an egregious example, if the mayor is opposed to romance novels, you don't stop buying romance novels, because I am quite aware that that is one of the most popular genres in almost every public library in the United States. The idea is to have a selection policy. And we'll move on to that. Guidelines for adding an item to the collection. This obviously doesn't resolve all issues, but it gives some basic principles. So you're not saying you don't buy this book or this book or this book, but you're going to basically say we're going to buy certain ones. The policy should be publicly available. Some things that the policy could talk about is on that next slide. The items of limited scope, okay, and you should have a patron request. This becomes a tricky issue because I don't know if it's happened here, but many libraries get someone who has expensive tastes in a narrow area. And you should buy a few books for this person, but if it comes in suddenly with a list of items that will cost $1,000 and you don't have $1,000 and nobody else will check them out except the other person, it is appropriate to say, no, we are not going to get those materials. if somebody came in and wanted a list of materials that proselytize for any specific religion, and they do not, you could also say that that would not be appropriate. So, and the other thing is, and I think I say it later, is also if they come in and want you to buy something that costs $500, that is a reason not to purchase it for economic reasons. The other thing is the whole policy about gifts. Nobody can come into the library and say, I'm going to give you 200 books that my father read when he was a kid, and I'd like you to add them all to the collection. And you have to say to anybody that's giving you gifts that the library is not obligated to add them to the collection, and that they will put them on the book sale, and if they're really horrible, they'll send them for recycling. Or they'll sell them on the internet. Libraries often sell their books on the internet. So anybody that says, well, you gotta add this and or I will give it to you, you say, fine, take it someplace else. And so this is one of the clear areas, because sometimes some of the bodies have been very good about giving gifts, some of which libraries have done. Scientology is very good about giving gifts to any library that wants them. And some libraries actually add to the collection, and I'm not objecting to that decision. But just because they send you 2 large boxes of material doesn't mean that you have to. Okay, again, the top one is your patrons want it. So you're going to get the library, you're going to get the latest bestseller, and you're suddenly going to have 15 holds on it right away. That's the kind of stuff you need to get. And people working with the patrons and the library will get a sense of what people want. People are coming in and asking for something. Once again, those romance novels. I was once at a library demo where the woman had checked out 2,000 romance novels in 1 year. And there was a sense of the library, a sense she made and have read all of them. So it's an area. Appearance on bestseller lists such as the New York Times. The story here, though, is an amazing controversy had in Michigan a while ago. And it involved a Michigan native. Do you have any idea what this was? Not myself. Anybody?
Not your stuff.
It was on the New York Times bestseller list. It was written by a Michigan native, but Rochester, great trouble. Sex by Madonna. And it created a great controversy. And for truthfully or not truthfully, a lot of libraries didn't purchase it because it was spiral bound and they had a policy against.
That little thing.
Yeah. I don't know what had happened if it had been a good hardcover book. And this would have really, really been, I'm not making light of the fact that this would have been a serious issue for libraries and for the communities. I'm not sure what I would have done if I had been a library. This is another one that has received a certain number of favorable reviews. So, all right, I'm going to diverge a little bit on this one too. This policy has the negative effect. Do you have any idea of what is one of the biggest changes in publishing in the last 10 years or so? What is happening?
Internet.
Self-publishing.
Okay, who said that? Okay, most of you do not realize that according, I edited a book on the subject. According to the statistics on the number of titles published, more than half, up to 70% of titles published in the United States every year are self-published.
Wow.
Okay, what this says nothing about sales. Most of the time, except for a few bestsellers, very few of them ever get significant. There are significant ones. To give you a real example, and I'm going to go back into the romance field. One of the people who wrote an article was an African-American author who published very successfully African-American romances that might be classified as soft porn. And she had a big following, and she started to self-publish when a publisher rejected one of her books, and she's laughing all the way to the bank. She's making vast amounts of money. But the problem would be, is I don't think that this should be a hard and fast requirement, because there are good self-published books that don't get reviewed. And again, and I may say it again later, if the self-published author lives in your district or in Michigan or has a Michigan theme, there's much more of a reason to get it. So even if you have rules, most of the time, there are times when you should be able to not follow them. And again, cost is an issue. So if you have very expensive items that are either popular or somebody wants, you are able to look and say, I think that we can get this for you through interlibrary loan. I don't think it justifies buying a copy for our relatively poor library. The next one is also that if you have preservation problems, and I'm giving you two real examples of pop-up books don't last very long in the public library. Usually after one or two circulations, they don't work anymore, they've been destroyed, they're expensive. And so I suggest that this is a valid policy. What happens at times in public libraries is the youth service librarians buys a few for demos at the various programs or to show to selected users. And the second one is art books with loose prints. You're not sure how many of the prints are going to come back, and so you have things against that. You can prefer local authors. So if you've got somebody in the community, if you're real smart, you say, could you please donate a copy?
Yeah.
Collection, and most are.
And then be considered a gift, right?
Right.
Goes
Yeah.
back.
It goes to a gift. But you will have it because you asked for it. And so that happens all the time. And you also will have self-published authors in your community that want to give a library program. That's your decision on whether you want to have a program or not. And then they're going to sell books at the program. I don't know if your library does that one or not. The other thing is that if there's somebody that's having media publicity, author tours, library visits, it usually will fall then into the other category of selling fairly well. But if it says author tour, that will be a sense that it's going to be pushed by the publisher and another reason for getting it. Format includes the availability of digital versions. I don't know what the as you probably know, many people are switching to ebooks and Kindle and all of the ways to read it and don't want physical books anymore. And I don't know how many of you actually ever want to see a VHS tape today? I will also add that CDs are becoming an obsolete format, and DVDs are probably becoming an obsolete format if things go to streaming. And then, as I said, it goes back to the pop-up books if the format is exceptionally fragile. So those are things you don't need. Okay. Challenge policies. Remember that challenging books is actually a First Amendment right too. So intellectual freedom is there, but then the ability to challenge what the government buys is also a First Amendment right. So you should have a clearly defined policy.
Very important.
Very important. It should be clear, it should be understandable, and it should explain everything. You should also have it adopted by your library board and your city officials, if at all possible, because it then became a legal policy that you could fall back on. And so this is one of the most important. I'm sure most of you are aware, not necessarily in Michigan, but challenges are becoming much more frequent this year all over the United States. I think the latest figure I saw is something like 5,000 challenges in the United States. This is, however, not as big a problem in Michigan.
I'm starting to see counter
Yeah.
challenges
Yeah.
against the
Yeah.
challenges, so
That's one of the things I would recommend.
should that be also in the policy then, how to formulate a counter?
It shouldn't be part of the challenge policy, but it should be something that if you held it, okay, holding a public hearing or asking for comments would take that over for the counter policy.
Okay, and do they have to have a time limit? So
Yes, there should be a time limit.
there has
for
to be
it.
a time limit.
Okay, and the other thing, the last one is the book should remain on the shelf. If that isn't possible, especially for juvenile materials, it might be possible to move it to a more restricted location. I think that's on the next slide. The other thing is, you remain respectful. You don't look at the person and say, oh, you idiot, how could you possibly challenge this wonderful book?
I'm not a librarian.
That is not the way to do it. And you acknowledge the point of view without agreeing. Oh, I can understand that you have concerns with this material. We will take them into consideration. The issues for the review committee, who chairs. Community members, I actually very strongly suggest that you have a member of the clergy. So that my sense is that you should do everything to make the person who has challenged the book, oftentimes out of real concerns, that they are being heard fairly and they're not coming up against the stacked body. And so, again, that's part of the reason for a clergy member. You've got to have a timeline for the process, make sure you know this is what needs to happen. When will the complainant be able to speak to the committee? And is there an appeal? Is there an appeal to the library board? Is there an appeal to the mayor? Is there an appeal to city councils? And also an agreement about what happens if the trust becomes involved. And I'm going to talk a bit more later about that. And involve the committee and try to get allies who are willing to support your position. I think it's much more important to say, you don't want your kids to check it out, but it would be just fine for my kids. Again, actually most challenges are not against adult material, but against minors. So, and minors have First Amendment rights, but that they are much more restricted, so they do not have the same ones as adults. I like the last point here, and I'm gonna tell this story. One of the issues about this all is I have written on the subject, I have very valid research, and most parents don't know what their kids are doing. And when they did a survey of parents and they asked them, how many of your kids are sexually active? And the survey said 10%, and the real results are 50%.
If the kid was being honest.
All right, but the same applies to parents. If you ask your teenage kids, have my parents ever committed adultery? It's about 10% say yes, when the real figure is around 50% too. So we have a big don't ask, don't tell, don't two generations. And I'm actually saying it makes sense. This is the one big advantage that public libraries have over school libraries. If someone comes in and says, I don't know, I don't want my kids coming in and checking out these materials or looking at this material, the public library can say, okay, you just come to the library with them. And you can monitor what they check out, and you can make sure that they're not doing and looking at anything appropriate. And this is, again, just to veer off a little bit into the media center. The media center doesn't have that option. They're acting in local parentis. The parent cannot as easily supervised with their children, and that's why censorship happens a lot more in school, and why it is more, it is easier to have the times when that happens, because the media center or the school library can't say this. The other thing is that most libraries don't force children to use only the children's collection. I do know that it occasionally occurs where the library tries very hard that you've got a sixth grader in the adult collection and you try to politely suggest, but in most cases, it's not something that can be legally enforced, but it can be a policy. The other thing that some libraries allow you to do is that you can have something put on the child's card that when they check the book out, they are told that there are certain restrictions on what they can check out. I'm not in favor of this, but it's something that libraries do, and there's nothing illegal about it. Parents have the right to determine what their children check out. And then some libraries have materials that are available only upon request, so you gotta ask for them. And guess why people don't ask for them?
You're embarrassed.
They're embarrassed. I mean, you're a boy and tell me, Miss Spear, can I have the one on the best sexual activities for high school students? That boy's not gonna see it. If I can tell another story from her library, she had a very good collection of these materials. Nobody checked them out, but they moved them on the library all the time. It's clear that the students were looking at them. And then again, I have to go back and tell my story. Back when I was in high school, I went to the Toledo Public Library. There was the locked case. And I had to go to the locked case to get those materials. Some of them which were classics like Voltaire's Candide. Wow. And so the things now that we would have no concerns about, I had to go to the locked case. And in one case, the librarian looked at me and she said, okay, I'll get it for you, but I don't see why you want to read it. And the funny backstory is, it was the person that had recommended to me gave the wrong title, and I really didn't want to read that book. But things have changed.
I have a question though. I mean, part of coming to the educational experience is what I just learned. I didn't know libraries will do not restrict youngsters from going to the adult section. I thought they had to tell them, no, you cannot.
They can. Okay, let me give you another, okay, I'm sorry, I believe you left something else. And in many libraries, it's the kid that's responsible for the book. The story I learned recently from the Michigan Library discussion list, that the second grader had an overdue book and they wouldn't talk to the parents about it. Johnny has the book checked out. We need to talk to Johnny. I'm not sure that's common. I'm not even sure it's a good idea, but it really happened.
But you know, when there's let's say, are we allowed to ask questions during that? Okay, all right. But so many times there's, let's say, for example, a juvenile commits a crime.
Right.
And then they say the individual is a juvenile, he's not mature, he didn't know or she didn't know what they were doing. How does that tie in with not being able to say to a child, you can't go down that aisle?
Okay, all right. I will give you the main reason. I was obviously a very, very good student in high school, given my subsequent career. And I was not interested anymore in the stuff in the juvenile collection. And I wanted to read the adult books. And so if you have a rule, it's harder to make exceptions. I once again think that if the person showed up at the circulation desk with something that was not only inappropriate in the sense of content, would be just too difficult. If a 2-year-old shows up with Spinoza's book on ethics at the circulation desk, I hope that the public librarian would say, are you sure that you want to check this out? So, but my point is that having more access is better than having less. And so I would hope that the kids could go and look for stuff in the adult collection. But I'm also not saying that there could be some cases where it was not appropriate. The second one is actually an important point. How many libraries do you go where they put the MPAA rating on the DVD? A lot, including my life. It's illegal.
It's illegal.
It's illegal. A private rating body like the MPAA cannot be used to restrict material protected under the government's First Amendment. So this is not the body that can determine that you can't check the materials out because of their rating. The same would be true today of many of the other older muting things, like if you were a Catholic and growing up like I was, every week the Catholic publication would have a list of all the movies and which ones.
I forgot about that.
You shouldn't be, yeah. So,
Yeah.
but that again could not be used by the library because now, will anybody get in trouble for that? No, but it is technically not legal. The last one also offends me a little bit. I've heard speeches by vendors who say, you don't need to worry if you buy it from us, because we will never, ever put anything that's objectionable in your collection.
It smacks of censorship.
And I don't like that. I mean, that will probably include LGBT books, it will include some other books. And just think of it today, and I thought there would be a change. There may be LGBT married couples in your district that have kids. And the argument is that they should be able to read material that reflect the lifestyle at home. So that Heather may indeed have two mommies. So why can't people read about Heather having two mommies? And that many of the books that are now appearing on the list to be challenged and censored are wonderful books. Some of them may be edgy, and I don't know what to say about that. I will admit very strongly that it is a contentious issue. And I'm not necessarily going to condemn people, but I would hope for the greatest openness. Okay, but beyond banned books, I think banned books is not the only thing, and it's much more the responsibility is the second one is buying the right stuff. It's not just about the banning, it's getting the right stuff into your collection. The other thing, and I'm gonna say something bad about librarians. Many librarians become very smug because they're against banning books. When instead, though, they put all the objections, they still don't buy any of them. And I had one case where, it was the librarian kept the books in his drawer. So they wouldn't be processed and put into the collection until the appropriate authorities found out about it. The other thing that some places do to enter the library, they steal the books. Or they check them out and never bring them back. So that is another way that unofficial censorship can happen. There are some libraries when that happens, they just keep rebuying the books. So there's always some of the copies, but that's another effective way. And sometimes they're even willing to pay for the additional copy. I mean, they pay for the one they stole. I was at a meeting where that guy said his most objectionable paper took the book down, put him in front of the library and burned them. And then he asked for her library card and he burned it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told that. Okay, I'm missing something. Where's my internet slide? Okay. Okay.
Different.
Oh, okay, I need to talk about the internet. I'm sorry it's not here. Uh, okay, I don't know what happened to it. The internet is the most contentious and difficult area for the library legally. The Supreme Court has determined that all material on the internet that is legal, the public library under the First Amendment is required to make it available to patrons. And you saw earlier that at this point, most sexual material, adult, between consenting adults, is legal. And this is an extremely difficult decision for libraries and one that gets them into trouble. The one piece of it is that also that the person has the right to come up and say, I would like you to shut the filter off. They don't have to get a reason, and the library has no legal way to say no. They often do. Again, the protection libraries have is that lots and lots of people are too hesitant to go to the desk and ask for that. In the same way, again, and this is off topic a bit, if you have a meeting room open to groups, the Ku Klux Klan could ask to have a meeting in your library and you could not say no. Fortunately, they don't ask, but that's the legality. The other issue is that at some point, channel 247, 62 of those before, may come in and they will go over and they will photograph the people who are looking at these objectionable materials, which you legally had to allow them to see and run it on the local news stories without any explanation that the library actually had no choice. The solution for this, according to the experts, is privacy screening and a private viewing area under monitors, because that doesn't mean you can touch anything. You can only look. And so the worry is of inappropriate behavior then becomes an issue for the police and you've got to take. But it's a really, really tough thing to deal with. And I said, I wish there were an easier answer, but there isn't. And again, another personal story, somebody on our Michigan library discussion list, he said, we got somebody looking at pornography on the internet, how long can we ban them from the library? And I responded to them that you can't, because they have the legal right. And it's the first time in my life I ever got hate. So, but that is indeed something, and I wished I had the fuller slide. I don't know what happened. I checked the slides this morning. No. Any questions about this extremely contentious issue? Okay, then we are moving to my conclusions, and we will fit mostly on time. Okay, the first one, I'll just repeat it again. That the main goal of the library is to meet the information needs of its user community. Lots of libraries don't do it, in part because they're only looking at their current users. And they're not necessarily finding things that would bring new users in. To give you a very low example, maybe if you started to buy books on computer gaming, you get a lot more teenagers coming in for those materials. If suddenly, I don't know what else you could expand, yeah?
Okay, so let's say you're in a community that is 40% Latino. Would you have to carry books in Spanish?
Okay, my sense is that, yes, it would be required under library principle to include a fairly high number of books in Spanish. Okay, I'm going back again to my history. I was reading grant proposal that the library wanted to get money to buy books for Latinos, their community was either 40 or 50% Latino, and they currently had it only spending 2% of their budget. I didn't get them the grant because I don't think they deserved it, given how little attention they have paid to this important members of your community. If you're in a very high African-American community, what's the genre? What's the genre of Black fiction?
We'll make it changing.
Okay, it's edgier than lots of people are comfortable with, but it's something that the readership wants. I would strongly believe, and I think they do, that the Detroit Public Library should have a fairly substantive collection in those areas. And so what I am saying is, no, you don't have to. What I'm saying is that you can reflect the needs of your new users, but you should not overlook completely the needs of your users that are still in your community in smaller numbers, but there should still be something that would be available for them. I hope I'm clear enough on that. Again, I would suspect that are radically different issues on the. I'm quite sure that the most liberal community in Michigan still has conservatives, and the most conservative community in Michigan still have liberals. And you need to provide materials for both. Again, this is not in a public library. I was very upset to hear of someone whose school had a project on the presidents who refused to buy a book on Donald Trump because she didn't agree. I think that's wrong. Okay, it's that be a place where you can find materials that support your viewpoints and also provide different perspectives that you might learn from. And I like these two principles here, and this will be my closing statement, is the response to bad speech is not to remove it, but to include good speech that offers an opposing viewpoint. And a truly great library contains something in it to both please and offend everyone.
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity. And I am concerned at times with my own profession that the last two principles are not receiving as much attention as they used to in the past. And with that, we will look at our final. Okay. I will not be hurt if you all leave now, but I'm also here if you have questions.
I can't read that.
Okay, my grandpa fought on the front lines as a librarian during the 2022 culture wars.
Okay.
Okay,
You know, after listening to all of this, there are two things. I mean, I'm impressed at what librarians have to go through. You know, I'm from the old school where there was a nice little old quiet lady sitting there, you know, wonderful. I mean, I understand that has changed. But to be able to walk into a library and have these people smile at me now makes me feel pretty good, because they're under a lot of pressure.
okay. All right, you're sitting quietly. I'll have more stories, or at least one more story, probably one. Have any of you ever heard of Cairo, Illinois?
What?
Okay. Cairo.
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
pronounce the way they pronounce it. Okay, it is at where the Ohio River joins the Mississippi. It is probably Little Detroit in its worst sense. It was a very thriving community. At one point, though, they enforced the new integration laws, and all the whites left, and it's very, very poor, and they have abandoned houses everywhere. But they have the most pretty traditional white library in the center of town that I suspect very few of the community have any interest in using. And the people we saw there were a few people, and somebody from outside was coming because they were doing genealogy. So the public library should swing to meet the needs of the community. And I'm actually going to give you one of the best examples I know is that the Southfield directors have been able to change the library from what it was as a predominantly white community to a predominantly African community by working very closely with the community and getting feedback on what they wanted to happen, and what they wanted the library to do. And in my opinion, at least, it has done a very successful transition from one mission to another mission. And I hope that libraries do that. Okay, questions?
Now, there are politicians that don't want, I'm sure you're familiar with
Yes, I'm very sure.
slavery and that kind of thing, they want to hide that.
Right,
Yeah, I'm sure you have an opinion on that.
I don't see how you can hide it, it's real.
Yeah.
Right, well, but
Yeah, I think you should.
they're trying.
I don't know what we're going to do in America where we have such radically different views of the country by two groups that are approximately equal and don't talk to each other. I don't know how to answer that.
Now, that kind of brings up, there's another subject now with third parties, running for election for that very reason. These two groups don't get along, they fight, they blame each other,
Okay,
so.
I'm staying out of politics.
Smart move.
Where does the library get the money from?
Okay, there's two major funding sources for public library. There's a third one. There are two major funding sources are, some of them get it from the local government. So, I know about Berkeley and Huntington Woods where I live. And each year, the city government allocates a certain amount of money to the public library. Depending on the community, they can also decide how much of that is spent for books and how much of it is spent for other things. Or the library gets the money and then they can decide what to do with it. So that's the way they get funded. The second way they get funded is in some places, the voters have passed villages to support the library. Now, these libraries are much more independent. They don't have to pay as much to the politicians. They still should pay attention to their community. Because even if they got the levy, most of the time they don't last forever. And when it comes up next, if the people don't like you anymore, they won't pass it for a second time. The third part, which is again relatively rare for public libraries, is they have endowments. Now, I would expect that in most public libraries in our part of the world don't have very large endowments. Public libraries like the Boston Public Library that have been around for centuries probably have lots and lots of endowments that have done very well in the stock market, so they get much of the operating expenses from these endowments.
And then there's grants and private funding, right?
Okay, donations, yes, I would almost include that in the endowment. Grants often aren't helpful. One of the things I taught grant writing too is make sure the grant does what you want to do, but sometimes you will get like, here, just apply, and there's a group now that gives public libraries in Michigan $100. And that would be something, but that seldom makes up for the bread and butter selection that you need to have to go. And again, and you're making the money on the picture. That can be something different.
I mentioned about people demonstrating in front of the library.
Yeah.
Is that better than in front of City Hall or the mayor's office?
Okay, if you're objecting to the library, what better place to be?
Well, they can only do so much. They'll say, well, go tell your politicians.
Yeah, but they'll get on the news and they'll get it.
Yeah. Hopefully.
I mean, we all know getting media time today, which is why I'm worried about the internet, because it's difficult for the library to understand that you can't allow people. All right, and that even becomes worse. You occasionally get somebody who literally wants to cause trouble.
You're
They
kidding.
want to cause trouble.
And they don't live in the community.
One of the ways they have done it is that they go and they bring up a totally inappropriate image of something that is low. And then they wait for the screensaver to come in, and the next person that clicks, get that image. Now, these are nasty people. But we have to contend that not all people in the world are nice, and we have nasty people. We were just in San Francisco where, as you probably know, the homeless present a very, very big problem. And, one of the scariest times ever was, it turns out that in the library is somewhat connected, that they had this mass meeting, at least on the night we were there, not this visit, but the last, where literally hundreds of homeless would meet right by the library. They had to bring the police in because they fight among each other and they do this, and it reminded me, at least being correct, of the mobs of the French Revolution. It was kind of a scary group of people. Other questions?
I don't know if this is First Amendment, but would you comment on the privacy rights of users? I mean, does the government have the right to look at the books you've checked out?
Not without a warrant.
Same with the internet.
Yeah. So yes, but only with a warrant. So the government should, no library should turn over the circulation records without a warrant. And in fact, from my own experience as a library manager, the people from, and I suspect it was the FBI, would show up in the evening when they would hope to get temporary staff, who would just turn them over without realizing that they couldn't do this without their having a warrant. So with a warrant, yes, without a warrant.
But that doesn't apply to minors and their appearance? Or just,
That's an iffy question.
Minors are always iffy.
Minors are iffy. I'm not sure. Okay, that's, all right, you asked, I said I might not be able to answer.
Your wife did it to you, yeah.
Okay, anything else?
This whole thing to me can be covered, it would take a whole semester. I mean, there's so much,
can't.
oh, yeah, so much
We
information.
can't, there are a whole semester then. There's the whole bit on media centers, which I didn't talk about. Academic libraries don't face the same problems, but there's stuff there. The academic library has to have copies of objectionable stuff just because they teach objectionable stuff. And there are times when students have come in and they think that everything in the library is true, and they look at the objectionable stuff and think that's okay, that's right, when the system example, what's wrong. So an academic library would probably have a fair number of examples of hate speech, just to be examples. of hate
Right,
speech.
yeah. Absolutely.
Which is objectionable, like Dearborn having Rushke's stuff,
Right.
right, you know.
But, it's, and, okay. I'm not a very private person. The library, public library probably shouldn't make my parents very bad because it turned me against their values.
That's teenage stuff.
I mean,
yeah,
I got the same values now, and everybody said I changed my mind, but I did. And so I expect that they will not happen with the public library.
But that could be part of growing up too.
I know,
That is part of
You
it,
know, yeah.
I know, but the library,
thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
if you are in
Reevaluating.
if you are in a family with totally firm values that you believe are truthful, you could make the contention that the public library is dangerous because your children may be exposed to ideas that don't agree with the family values.
Yeah.
And will then change because of them. And so there are many groups that worry about the public library.
A funny story about that, a very strict family like yours, and my brother, who was very, loved, you know, he was a voracious reader, and he always wanted all the sides of everything, so like at 14, he ordered a book on communism. And this is, and my mother, I'll never forget, when she got that book, and because he was curious, what was that about? It was talking about anti-communism, and he wanted to know what it was, you know.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're tripping another memory. I hope the story. Okay, I have not been able to track this down. But when I was, I think, in grade school, I checked out a book from my local public library. And the book was published in World War II, which is the reason why it could be published. And it was about street urchins saving Stalin from being assassinated. And by the time I read this book in the 50s, assassinating Stalin would have been something wonderful.
No.
And I have made some very serious efforts trying to find this book and writing an article about it, but I have never succeeded. But it was that brief period during World War II, and Stalin was our friend, and we were working together. And, even in the grade, I was amazed that I didn't suddenly felt that, no, this is very strange that this book is.
Yeah, my brother also ordered my Kampf.
Okay,
Which was not
yeah.
popular.
It's true that since 9/11, and Homeland Security, the books that you check out are now public review.
You have to have a warrant.
Okay, so, but it could be done.
It could be done, yeah.
Okay.
In other words, okay, some libraries would do it. But the technical rule is if they have a court warrant, the library has no choice but to make the records available. What many libraries do is that they don't keep the records for a long period of time precisely for that reason. I discovered actually just last week that that isn't true for my library, because I went in and checked on my account. And it had a list of all the books I had checked out since 2020. Now, I don't know whether they got rid of the older ones or whether how many you check out made it, but the records were there and I was easily able to access them.
Because I was just teasing my son a few years ago because I had really made him mad. And I had said something about it, that if you're gonna go to the library and find a book on how to kill your mother, you know, Homeland Security says I can find that.
They have used these records, and there are people who are afraid to even search the internet for stuff
Yeah.
like that. Because they are worried that somehow or other they're gonna get in trouble later. Okay. Anything else? All right,
Very-
thank you all for.
very
And I don't think anybody fell asleep.
Thank you so much.
Now, you mentioned
have
getting a
private
copy of that.
Come on.
Yeah.
Now, I have to